Everybody, it's Kelly Justice with the Philosophy Society. It is May 29th, 2024. We are in the library of Toronto Metropolitan University, and people in the room, people online, people YouTube later. So we're going to continue with the 7 Habits now, because it's a book that is good. And we are on, in this edition, page 110. And so I'm going to start with the slides here. She could do it from hers, but I can't do it from mine because I have a Chromebook. So, okay. So we're starting with begin with the end in mind. And so I'm going to read the slide first, and then we're going to go through the book together. So this is a summary of the principles within the text or this chapter. So we have 3 slides here for principles. And then I'm going to go through the book in detail. So he begins the chapter by saying, what lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. So this goes back to his his inside out approach, right? And then he says, begin with the image, picture, or paradigm of the end of your life as your frame of reference or the criterion by which everything else is examined. And this is fundamentally the main property of this chapter, what he means by begin with the end in mind. He says, know where you're going so that you better understand where you are now, and so that the steps you take are always in the right direction. And so fundamentally, he wants us to develop a sense of what our goals are. And once we know what our goals are, then every decision we make will lead us closer to those goals. So it's not going to be the same page, but the chapter is Habit 2.
Question?
Yep.
So they say that begin, with the end, always know your goal. But I encounter in my life, that sometimes, it's hard to figure out what's the goal is.
Yeah.
For example, I like learning philosophy, but there's so many things to learn. From Plato to you name it. And you only have limited time. Everybody only have limited time. Like psychology, I want to study from Freud to Lacan to Jung. Each one will take my whole life to study it. But I know it's impossible. But in the meantime, I feel like if I only focus on tiny, then I won't be able to see the full picture.
Yes.
So then, what's my goal here? What's my goal of reading here? Is to get wisdom or what? Because this question is almost like I found it very difficult to answer. So what is the goal here?
What is the purpose?
What is the purpose? Yeah.
Yeah. And
of reading.
Dimitri, you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that since our time is so limited, from my experience, the best thing you could do is to learn from those who have studied these people or have studied certain subjects that have the wisdom and the knowledge, and that can give you like maybe a synopsis or like a bullet points like list of the things that they've learned through the text or the passages, the readings, the lessons and whatnot. So you don't have to not waste your time, but spend your time reading all about it, the ins and outs, when you can just get a little breakdown from someone who's already done it before you.
Being efficient. And that is good sometimes, but you do lose some of the quality of the experience of learning when you're learning through the eyes of somebody else.
Especially in philosophy.
Yeah.
It's like you're learning secondhand.
Yeah.
Like I spent 4 years studying the pure critiques of the Kant book,
Yeah.
paragraph by paragraph.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, and then somebody tell me, oh, you can just read a secondhand book. No, it's totally different,
It's true.
But in the meantime, there's no way, in my life, there's only one book of Kant, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, so that's a dilemma here. I think it's facing everybody. If you want a wisdom, you don't want to just look at a horse. You only look at the one leg. You want to grasp the whole picture. That's probably where the wisdom is. But you don't have time. So how do you solve that dilemma?
So I think part of it is starting early, right? And the other part is like it's about the skill part of the skill of philosophizing is learning to read and learning to read logically. And so you can study logic first, right? There's an order to things. And when you learn how arguments are put together, then you can evaluate someone else's arguments much more efficiently, right? And I also think that learning chronologically, like when we talk about the history, like your introductory philosophy class, usually they start that class with like Plato or the pre-Socratics, and then they go chronologically through time. And that's useful because you can see the development of ideas. Like Plato said this, and then Aristotle said this, right? And then it developed from there. Seneca said this or whatever, you know? And yeah, so I think that's useful. And part of it too is just what speaks to you. There's some things that you need to make sense of, and it's wise for you to start with that because it's going to complete your understanding. And so one of the notions we have here is the concept of the understanding, right? Your comprehensive perspective on how you put all of the ideas together to make sense of them. And when you evaluate a philosopher, right, like Plato's idea of the forms, you know, you can read what Plato says in his arguments, and then you can develop a sense of whether those arguments are sound, right? And part of it, some of the premises' truth could be empirical, right? And we can bring in other philosophical principles like Kuhn's like criteria of adequacy. So we, in our Philosopher's Wizard's Tower, we would summon Kuhn right now, and we would say, is this falsifiable or proper? And part of the issue is that the theory of forms is a little unfalsifiable at the best. It's completely unfalsifiable at the worst, right? Like, how can we test it? You really can't, right? So the goal, now part of our critique of Stephen Covey here is that it's not always, and I'm gonna get to another critique that's similar to this one, is we don't always have to have a goal in mind for there to be a purpose to something. It may be an intrinsic thing, right? Like experiencing the sunset, you may not have a goal in mind. It may just be the experience itself, to be with the sunset and the colors in that moment. And that's it, right? It's not because you want to see it go all the way up. You know, that's not actually is not the goal, right? In some ways, you would pause it and be there for a long time, you know? So we can criticize that part of it. Now, this book, again, is written from an effectiveness context, right? So when he's talking about goals, we'll see as we go through it, because I'm drawing these quotes. These are from the whole chapter. They're kind of out of context. He's talking about our character. What kind of person do you want to be? And when you think about the kind of person you want to be, all of your relationships, you can emulate that kind of person or that self in that relationship. And then that way, at the end of your life, begin with the end in mind, people would say, this is the kind of person that they were. This is my experience with them. And when I was with them when they were here, this is what they embarked on me, right? Let's continue, and then we'll keep on going back to it. You know, but this is a good point, is not everything has to be goal-oriented in that way. And in my own life, the reason I changed my name is because I almost died twice. And the second time I was like, it's not just changing my name that needs to be done, it's how I'm living. And that's not the plans I'm making, which are goals, it's how I feel. Because if I'm stressed out, I need to just stop whatever I'm doing. And if somebody else is making me stressed, I need to either remove myself or them. Because if I die, then what, right? All those goals and plans die with me. You need your heart to get there, literally, right?
Yeah, just one more quick comment. So I think the idea of this with a goal or purpose, in your life, because there's also a theory called the heart flow.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you have a goal, then it's much easier to have. It's easier to have the feeling of achievement, which is called the heart flow. You know, okay. They use example like climbing a rock. Yep. You know, those extreme extreme players. You know, that when they climb, so they have a very clear goal, with to overcome this mountain, and they also see the progress. So every day I'm making a progress towards that goal. You know, we probably all, this is called heart flow. hurtful. I think from one of the psychologists.
Mhm.
But so that's the beauty of having this goal. But the other thing is, I just mentioned, there's something, like what I just mentioned about study. This is a knowledge explosion. There's the era. There's AI. Just coming out. I try to catch up. Everything is catching up. And you don't see where's the goal. What's the goal? The goal is to be awakening. Why we study philosophy? It's not like climbing a rock. No philosopher will claim that they know everything. If I know this, I become God. No. So there's no clear goal.
Mm.
So then it's difficult to have a sense of achievement.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with this kind of problem?
So I think you can compartmentalize it, break it down into smaller parts. We can look at intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. There's a difference between the two. So part of studying philosophy is intrinsic, just like looking at the sunset or sunrise. You're doing it for the sake of doing it. It's like a practice, like playing music, right? And then there can be like goal-oriented objectives. For example, like reading Plato. And there may be specific parts of Plato that are more valuable than other parts because he has a lot of dialogues that you can read, right? And it won't take you that long to read those ones, When you go into the later philosophers, they reference the previous philosophers usually, right? And so you will get some repetition, so it does get a little easier. And once you are experienced, like for example, Kant, when you read the Critique of Pure Reason, like I have, and there's an essay on the website you can review. I wrote an essay on objective reality based on Kant's theory. And when you practice those very difficult individuals, then the other people get easier, especially when you train yourself in logic, right? So I think we can break this apart more. And let's keep this as a theme and we'll come back to it, Okay, so he says, if the ladder is not leaning against the right wall, every step we take just gets us to the wrong place. If we do not develop our own self-awareness and become responsible for first creations, we empower other people and circumstances outside of our circle of influence to shape much of our lives by default. So there's a lot in this statement. He talks about self-awareness in the previous chapter. First creation is a new concept that he comes up with here that we'll get to. And circle of influence is also in the previous chapter. And so he's really just trying to talk about like your independence of making your own decisions and not being led by other factors that'll take away from your own personal autonomy in making your decisions. Management is efficiency in climbing the ladder of success. Leadership determines whether the ladder is leaning against the right wall. And so this is an important distinction between leadership and management. Leadership is, are we going in the right direction? And management is, how well are we getting there, right? So continuing with this, no management success can compensate for failure in leadership. If you're going in the wrong direction, the speed of which you go in that direction is not going to help you get there any faster because the destination is incorrect, right? And he talks about this in previous chapters about paradigm shift. If you have the wrong map to the city you're in, it's not going to help you in any way to get to where you want to be, right? The key to the ability to change is a change of the sense of what you are, what you are about and what you value. So this goes back to paradigms again, and he talks about being principle-centered. And that's fundamental to his philosophy, is to live by principles. But we also need a mechanism to determine what principles are sound. And if we have a problem with a principle, like how do we determine that, right? And then which ones ought we ascribe to? And so that's what being philosophical is, again, at the end of the day. The work will come again, but childhood won't. So this comes from how we relate to our kids, and that when they're kids, that's the only time that they're going to be like that. And those are the important moments to spend with them and to be with them. But you can always make money another day. Create one clear center from which you consistently derive a high degree of security, guidance, wisdom, and power, empowering your proactivity and giving congruency and harmony to every part of your life. And so what he means by that center is that principle center. And I think it's important, again, to be very clear about what he means by that. He could be ambiguous about principled, right? It's not stringent what the definition is really. Now, he's speaking from a Christian perspective. So for him, he has some sort of infallible knowledge. He's like, Christianity is just the answer. Don't worry about it. Just have faith. For me, that's not good enough.
Who says that?
Stephen Covey.
Oh, Steve Covey.
He's not saying explicitly, but I'm just letting you know that he's Christian, and that's why he's so confident in what the principles are. He doesn't say that in this book necessarily, but that's where he's getting this like sense of, I know exactly what the answer is. But if I was going to write this book, there would be an entire section on this is what principles are. This is how you create them. This is how you modify them. But it's not that clear in here. It's lacking philosophical rigor in that sense, right? Like when Socrates goes through the arguments in the Republic and he discusses what the nature of justice is, right? Is justice just the mighty or the strong? Well, no, not always, right? Not often, right? And so, and Socrates goes through a questioning process to determine what justice isn't at the end of the day, right? And so we don't find that here, right? But there is still, this is still a good stepping stone to say, well, what could it be? And then as the Philosophy Society, we can use that to talk about and to further our own wisdom, right? So by centering our lives on correct principles, so again, what is that? We create a solid foundation for development for the 4 life support factors, which is security, guidance, wisdom, and power. Our knowledge and understanding of correct principles is limited by our own lack of awareness of our true nature and the world around us. Okay, that's interesting. What is our true nature?
That was my question.
But,
How
you
do
know,
Yeah.
your capability or your limits, or if you have maybe no limits, how do you know?
there you go. And there's some parts of human nature, like nature could just be like anything that humans can do. Humans can do it, it's natural. Does that mean it's good? Is everything in nature that is produced good for us? No. Cyanide is a naturally producing substance. Super not good for you to have any of that in your system, right? Little small portions are okay because some of it in almonds or whatever, but the toxicity level of that can kill you, right? And so it's not about our true nature, but I think our true capacity for goodness, for example. And then what is goodness? Well, it being ethical, right? We could have certain properties like learning to communicate, and that's where we can be clear about some things, right? And talk about what that would be. And the world around us. Well, the world around us can be a bad thing in some ways. And we need to be able to have some way to mediate and discuss why it is good or bad.
Yeah, my phone actually died. So I'm just wondering what's going on here. Is this the habit thing we're doing, or is this something else?
I was sad. I thought you escaped because I started talking. I was like, oh, he doesn't want to hear me talk.
Oh, from that? No way, dude. I've been in battles for hours. That's nothing.
I believe you, don't worry.
Yeah.
Okay,
But yeah,
so
what are we doing?
the 7 Habits. Did you buy the book yet?
No, I don't have the book. But is this one of the habits, like principles? Is that what we're doing?
This is an overview of all the principles in the chapter, and then we're going to start going through the chapter specifically. So let's continue, okay?
Okay.
So by centering our lives on timeless, unchanging principles, we create a fundamental paradigm of effective living. So unchanging principles, yes. And again, what is a principle, right? And I've talked about this before. That could be a way of understanding our human nature that is a simplified linguistic form, right? Because there can be principles of arithmetic, right? Always, like what's the principle of arithmetic? You know, like Pythagorean's theorem in some ways. There's a principle within that, you know, or all the angles within a triangle equal 180 degrees. If you violate that principle, then you're violating the nature of arithmetic to some degree, right? And so there will be elements of being human. That is the fundamental natural property. And there will be principles, some linguistic statement that will guide you in the right direction for being human, right? Like get enough sleep is a principle. What is that? Well, we can talk about that. There's like a way to determine that empirically. Okay, next, slide 3. So these are the last couple points here, and then we'll get into the chapter. Specific decisions you're making now that will lead to who you are as in your character, right? Everyone has their own specific vocation or mission in life. Therein, they cannot be replaced, nor can life be repeated. Thus, everyone's task is as unique as their specific opportunity to implement it. This is Viktor Frankl he's quoting here. You know, he's talking about people's identity and how their identity is related to things they're doing that is unique. And it's important for them to see the opportunities in the moment and in their life to exercise whatever that mission might be, right? And if you have no involvement, no commitment, then he's talking about like working in groups. If people aren't involved in what they're doing, they're not going to be committed to it. So those are that's an overview of this chapter entirely. And so now let's go to the first section, principles of personal leadership. So he has a thought experiment of visualizing your own funeral. So basically the way I do this is I go through the slide and then I'm going to read from the text. So he says, what would people say about you? And that will determine what your definition of success is. So let's open up the book here. Okay, so he says, find a place where you can be alone and uninterrupted. Clear your mind of everything except what you will read, and I will invite you to do. Focus with me and really open your mind. So in your mind's eye, see yourself going to a funeral of a loved one. Picture yourself driving there. You walk inside the building, you notice some flowers. You see the faces of people you know, your family and your friends. You feel the shared sense of sorrow and loss, and also the joy of having known this individual that radiates from all the people there. You walk to the front of the room and you look inside the casket and you realize it's you. This is your funeral 3 years from today. All these people have come to honor you, to express feelings of love and appreciation for your life. You take a seat, you wait for the service to begin, you look at the program, there's some speakers, someone from your family, one of your friends, someone from work, someone from your spiritual or community organization. So we're on the second page. So if you go to this part of the chapter, we're on the next page. So you can follow the same book, but you can follow along. So go to habit 2.
Page are we on?
For your version, it's page 111. So now he says, think deeply. What would you like each of these speakers at your funeral to say about you, to say about you and your life? What kind of a husband, wife, father, or mother would you like their words to reflect? What kind of son or daughter or cousin? What kind of friend are you? What kind of a working partner are you? Now, this is the point here, because this book is a lot about character from his perspective and what character means. What character would you like them to have seen in you? What contributions, what achievements would you want them to remember? What difference would you like to have made in their lives? What are your impressions from this experience? This will increase your personal understanding of habit 2. So when we talk about character in this context, I think what we're trying to say is, what did this person decide to do with the circumstances that they were faced with? So if someone died and you say, well, you know, like the hurricane engulfed them, you could say that. Or you could say they were in a hurricane and they saved 3 people's lives, survived, and then had a family, or helped rebuild the town. And that goes back to the previous chapter of being proactive. Being proactive is the decisions that you choose to make with the circumstances that you're faced, instead of just being reactive. You're consciously making a choice.
It's pretty existentialist.
Yeah, right? And so that's what we're trying to say when we talk about begin with the end in mind in some ways, is what is the character that you want to embark on the people in your life.
I actually did this experiment in a psychological workshop.
Nice.
With people just surround around me, and then it's a very totally into the situation. And I remember what I want to say, maybe to the dead me is this guy tried his best.
That's good. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to read the slide and then go to the book. What it means to begin with the end in mind. Determine deep fundamental values by utilizing inner guidance system. And so that inner guidance system would be, so for example, if we have ethical principles like do good, beneficence, right? Or non-maleficence, don't cause harm. right? That's going to guide us in our actions with others, right? Or the environment. Each part of life can be examined in the context of the whole, of what matters most. And so, like, for example, being a good mother or a parent might be the most important priority that somebody has. And so when they're faced with, they can go out with their friends and party, or they can stay at home and read something to their kids, they may choose to read something, right? Because of the value of that experience. And when I think when you're like a teenager, you're like, I don't give a shit about any of this stuff. I just want to go party with myself. That's because you just need to socialize and grow as a person at that age, right? When you're older, you're like, I've done this so many times and it's led me nowhere, right? Each day contributes meaningfully to the vision of one's life as a whole. And so that's part of what he means by character, right? It's this totality of all of these experiences together. And he wants you to value that one day. He wants you to value how that 1 penny or dollar in the piggy bank of your life adds to who and what you are. And if every day has some value, eventually it will accumulate to a certain degree of personal wealth, a wealth of character, a wealth of who you are based on your decisions, based on being proactive. Starting with a clear understanding of destination. So he goes back to, well, what are you spending your money on? If we're going to use that analogy, right? What is your purpose in life? And he says that people get stuck in this thing called an activity trap, effective busyness, which is basically working like a 9-to-5 job, right? Unless that job is meaningful. But if you're just making money, well, what is the money for? Like, what if you keep on working as hard as you can and you get super stressed out and then you get hurt at work and now you can't even use your legs anymore or something, or you can't do fun things with your partner? How is that good, right? Just like I said about my heart. If I die because of these goals I have for myself, like being this philosophy society guy, then what? That's not good. So it's a bad thing, right? Could have just become a carpenter and just drank beer and I'm going to go had twice as much life. I wouldn't have been this guy, but what's more valuable? You know what I mean? It's how you do it.
But what about, not everybody can do the job they want or they like, they have to work for money or what, using Karl Marx's word, what do you call it? Like, they don't, basically they're forced to do the thing that they don't like, they lose the connection with the job. So it's not from their heart. There's so many people still doing that, So what about those people? What kind of choice do they have?
I think we need to talk about it. That's why I'm a mental health counselor. Because we can say, what are we really going to do? It's going to take a little bit of time to reflect on our decisions. First, who are you? What is your identity? And what can you do that would be good for you? I give the example of, even if I made it like minimum wage or $20 an hour, if I did that and being a gardener instead of being a bartender and like fighting for tips and all the stress involved, it just doesn't work with my personality. But the sense of achievement, like you were saying, like climbing a rock, like building a garden and looking at it grow, that is a more beautiful experience, I think, than focusing on the accumulation of money. Because the amount of stress tax that the other job gives me and all the time it takes to like heal myself emotionally from that, it's like, it doesn't even matter if I make less money, because then I can actually spend it on a meaningful activity, right?
Yeah, that's when I like that. I think that works. To some degree. But also, we live in a society, like this Toronto. The expensive housing. We're not just live in a vacuum. There's a lot of things that you cannot control. He also talk about So what about you have to work as a bartender because you have kids to feed. Then this time. You don't have the choice to be a gardener, even though you could say, the money, you need to do that. So many people still working like a slave. What can we say to those people?
Maybe today and tomorrow you have to, but we can put incremental effort towards a shift, right? And so that might be a form of training or developing a skill or networking. Right. And then that time, when it's accumulated, can lead to meeting somebody that you can do a different form of employment with. Right. And planning things out. Yeah. What's up, Ross?
Hey, on the last point, approach roles with values and directions clear. Can you just elaborate with the values and like how one would come up with those things and what sort of effect that would have?
Okay. Well, let me do the next. I'll get to that one in a sec. So that makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So daily management and doing what matters. So daily management is different than the leadership thing, right? So I can manage my life by making decisions about what I'm doing one moment to the next, but doing what matters is that every moment leads to something that is my main goal. And then approach roles with values and directions that are clear. The roles would be like your character, and the value is what's important within that character role. So he gives an example of being a parent, my role as a parent, and the value is my child's upbringing. So he gives examples of getting upset with the kids, right? And that's diminishing, like even I'm in that role of being a parent, if I act in a way that's abusive, that diminishes the value of raising good kids, right? And then the direction, making sure a clear direction, that's just really what he means by beginning with the end in mind, is know what your goal is and then progress towards that goal. Okay, so let's just look at the book. So he says, the visualization experience will hopefully elicit what those deep fundamental values are, what people are going to say about you after the fact. So it's what it means to begin with the end in mind. That's the section. You establish a brief contact with your inner guidance system at the heart of your circle of influence, which is what your values are, what's important to you. And he gives this example of Joseph Addison, which I think is where he derived this example of the funeral. And he basically just talks about this, going to the tombs of dead people and having some sense of empathy for the dead. And yeah. And so he says, habit 2 at the bottom applies to many different circumstances and levels of life. Most fundamental application of begin with the end in mind. Begin today with an image, picture, or paradigm of the end of your life as your frame of reference or criterion by which everything else is examined. Let's read that one more time. Begin today with an image, picture, or paradigm of the end of your life, maybe not the end of your life, but of something you wish to become or something in your life that's very important that would make you happy, as your frame of reference or the criterion by which everything else is examined. So there's a good film that's part of the Philosophy Society curriculum that's called Gattaca, 1997, with Ethan Hawke and other dude.
Gattaca.
Forget his name.
That's good movie.
And it's on the list. Natalia is our administrative assistant and has been pressuring me to start the films again. We will do one soon. Yes. And so it's about a guy that wants to become an astronaut. Okay, but there's a lot of obstructions in the way. But he keeps that image of himself as the astronaut and is determined to do it. And everything he does leads to that as the end goal, right?
How do you spell it?
Gattaca. Each part of your life, today's behavior, tomorrow's behavior, next week's behavior, next month's behavior, can be examined in the context of the whole, of what really matters most to you. So myself as an example, creating this educational institution, the Philosophy Society, or the social group matters a lot to me. And so I focus my time and my efforts on developing this and being here every week, almost 3 years in a row.
3 years in a row. Wow.
Every single week I have been here. Sick, happy, tired, stressed. I make it work. And Natalia can see. She's like, you don't look good today. Shouldn't say it like that.
Even during the pandemic?
We started after pandemic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 3 years. Okay, so, and that's part of our identity. And so we can talk about identity. There's a chapter on the website called Meaning and Purpose. And you guys can read that to be more clear about what's important to you, right? Okay, so by keeping that end clearly in mind, you can make certain that whatever you do on any particular day does not violate the criteria you have defined as supremely important. Each day of your life contributes in a meaningful way to the vision you have of your life as a whole, right? So what is the purpose of your life? And you want to put effort towards that purpose a little bit every day. That's a good thing, right? To begin with the end in mind means to start with a clear understanding of your destination. What is your goal in life? And we've already discussed that there are intrinsic goals that we may not do with intrinsic behaviors or actions, decisions that don't have a specific goal in mind. But in this context, we're just going to look at goal-oriented decisions, right? We can talk about that, what we talked about earlier, and that's good, right? Intrinsic things are important.
But how do we know the goal of our life?
It depends on who you are. There's certain things that will matter to you and you'll derive more meaning from, that will create coherence to your identity. So for myself, I come from a family that has some mental health issues, and learning about psychology and philosophy was meaningful to me. It made sense. It may help me make sense of my life and my experience with my family. And then I realized that there was something missing in philosophy. And so the philosophy society is what I feel is that connection. It brings it back to where it needs to be, because that's what Plato did. He created a community of people to think about things in the same way that I was haphazardly thinking about the self earlier. That's practice. It's important and it's good. Not even in the sense that I'm looking to prove how successful I am at it. And look at me. It's not a bravado thing. It's about the practice, right? And being vulnerable in thought and being open to criticism. That way we can learn and think in a healthy way, right? Not in a dogmatic way where we say God has the answer and I am the authority. You must listen to what my interpretation of God is. No, sorry, you're human just like me. You shit and eat, and your shit stinks just like mine, right? And it's important to remember that. Not that you want to smell it, but just know that we're all basically the same in certain ways. Okay.
I like that.
Thanks. Okay, to begin with the end, so it means to know where you're going, so you better understand where you are now, and so that steps you take are always in the right direction. And again, this is in the context of effectiveness. He's saying if you want to meet your goals, you want all your actions to accumulate towards that goal so you can actually successfully complete it, so that you don't die without completing your goals, right? So choose goals that are important to you, that you value, and then do things to get you closer to the goal. Someone says, I love music, I want to be a musician, but you never practice. Well, you're not going to get anywhere, right? You have to practice a little bit at least, right? Incredibly easy to get caught up in an activity trap. So the busyness of life, you work harder at climbing the ladder of success, only to discover it's leaning against the wrong wall. It's possible to be busy without even being effective, right? People find themselves achieving victories that are empty. Success has come at the expense of things that suddenly realize were far more valuable to them. People struggle to achieve higher income, more recognition of a certain degree or professional competence, only to find that their drive to achieve their goal blinded them in things that really mattered most and are now gone. Like someone who's really focused on work and never spends time with their kids, or somebody that wanted to travel and never got to because they were focused on work or something like that. Or they just focus on monetary values alone and they don't focus on intrinsic or experiential values, right? And then they lose a bunch of money because the stock market crashes or there's like some recession, and then 4 years of work has gone down the drain and they could have just spent that money on, going somewhere or something like that, right? How different our lives are when we really know what is deeply important to us. Keeping that picture in mind, we manage ourselves each day to be and to do what really matters most. If the ladder is not leaning against the right wall, every step we take will just get us to the wrong place faster. We may be very busy, we may be very efficient, but we will also be truly effective only when we begin with the end in mind. So making sure that when you are progressing towards a goal, that you know what the goal is and the goal is clear, right? Even if it's intrinsic, you can kind of like massage that a bit and say, my goal is to appreciate the sun. And then you can say, I don't want any distractions. I'm going to go somewhere where no one's going to bother me so I can have a complete experience that's devoted to this specific task. I want to learn philosophy. I'm going to go to the Philosophy Society. I'm going to take a class in philosophy. I'm going to devote time to just absorbing this as an experience in itself, right? So I'm going to create space to be intrinsic. If you carefully consider what you wanted to be said about you in the funeral experience, you will find your definition of success. So maybe, because other people's judgments might be incorrect, right? Different from the definition you thought you had. It could be different than what you thought you had. So maybe fame, achievement, money are on the wrong wall. When you begin with the end in mind, you get a different perspective. So he's doing this to kind of give us a paradigm shift. He's trying to say, well, okay, you have certain beliefs now, but what really matters to you? So let's look at it. Let's change the perspective and look at it from the end, like when you're dead. And so maybe getting all the money, getting $1 million, that could be a goal right now. But if you have a bad relationship with your parents, maybe your parents saying, I love my daughter or son, whatever, and they were always there for me, right? Or my best friend always listened to me. And whenever I called them, they always made me a priority. Yep,
Yeah, could I just add something to this? Because I think it relates.
sure.
In Buddhism, we actually have a practice. It's called the death practice. So every single day, I have an alarm set up where as soon as that alarm rings, you think about your death. And the reason that we do that, it's not supposed to give you anxiety or scare you, but pretty much to let you know that in reality, you could die any second. And what that does, it basically reframes you to basically really pay attention to what you're doing that day. And I think that actually keeps you focused on what is important, which sort of correlates with this slide, I feel like.
Very good. It goes with the previous funeral example. Thank you, Vikas. Very good. Okay, so when you
I like it. I like it. I think that Buddhism actually developed, similar to the funeral, but they kind of help you to develop this habit. Like I know, some of the houses that are very expensive is next to the what do you call it, the tombs.
Okay.
So you can see the tombs, the dead body through your window every day. So kind of
reminds you. Yeah.
So I like the Buddhism practice because they help.
Nice.
They help you develop this habit because it's easy to read this book, but next day I forgot. That's a human.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
All right, let's continue. When you begin with the end in mind, you gain a different perspective. One man asked another on the death of a mutual friend, how much did he leave? And his friend responded, he left it all. So one person's, orientation was monetary, and the other person was trying to get out of that, right? Next section, all things are created twice. So there's a little bit of criticism in this, and that's okay. So begin with the end in mind, based on the principle that all things are created twice. What does this mean? Again, he's coming from a Christian perspective that God created man and God created everything. And so that is a certain belief that I would say is not true, but that's where he's coming from. And I think that's where he gets this context, right? So a mental or first creation, physical or second creation to all things. So a construction of a home, for example, he says you create it first in your mind on the blueprint, and then you build the house, right? If you don't do that, you can make mistakes and it'll cost you more money. So the carpenter's rule is measure twice, cut once. Make sure that you have the blueprint, which is he calls the first creation, and then you put it into physical creation, which is the second creation. Other examples, if you want a business or successful enterprise, you define it in your mind first. You think about it clearly, your target market, what services you're going to provide. You do some research, and then you execute that business as a second creation in reality. Same with parenting. You think about you want to raise responsible, self-disciplined children. You keep that end, that goal clearly in mind, and then you do that on a daily basis as you get towards that end. To varying degrees, use this principle in many different areas of life. Before you go on a trip, you determine your destination. Next page. Plan out the best route. If you're planting a garden, you think about it in your mind first. If you're going to give a speech, you write out the speech. If you're designing clothes, same thing. To the extent to which we understand the principle of two creations is to accept the responsibility for both. We act within and enlarge the borders of our circle of influence, the things we have an effect on. To the extent to which we do not operate in harmony with this principle and do not take charge of the first creation, we diminish it. So I don't agree with that last point. Some things we do, like when we talk about creative people, they don't necessarily have in mind what the end result's going to look like, actually. And even as a carpenter, someone who speaks from the position that has been a carpenter, when you're like, this is the blueprint, and then I go actually to the physical space, the physical space doesn't represent the blueprint. And when we open the wall up, there could be things in there that we didn't know they were there. And now we have to change what the blueprint is, right? So there's going to be some kind of a feedback loop and iterative process. And at the same time, when you're creating things, like, for example, I created this diagram on the board. I didn't know what it was going to look like. I was doing it as I go. And when I looked at it after I drew something, I would see it, and then I would feel the sense of something's missing, and then I would add to it. And sometimes people will do that in the creative process. You'll do a little bit, you'll step back and look at it, and you'll be like, oh, this is missing, and then you'll add to it and adjust it. And you'll go back and forth in the iterative process until it's done, until you feel this is complete now, right?
Yeah.
Would that be adaptation?
Adaptation is like an organism's response to environmental demands. So kind of. One sec, Vikas. David had something
Oh,
to say.
okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I still go back to the goals, to the end, because some of the things you just mentioned, the carpenter. But what about a relation, like a marriage?
Yep.
So when you get married, you just say, "Hey, I need to achieve this goal in my 50 years of marriage," because that sounds like a very, there's a intangible, there's a sensational part. How do you this is a very rational.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't have this goal, but what is the goal for marriage? To marry for 50 years? If I marry for 50 years, then I achieve my goal. Is that a goal? So I mean, what does Romeo and Juliet? What's the goal of their thing?
Dying was not the goal.
Right. So that's what I mean. There's something in life, it's not like making a table or getting a doctorate degree or being an engineer. That's very clear,
Yeah.
But there's something. It's very intangible.
Mhm. It's unknown.
It's unknown, right?
Yes.
So that's my puzzle.
So philosophically, and you can speak to this, I think, to some degree, probably touched on this, there's empiricism and rationalism. This is a very rational, premeditated, in the mind knowledge kind of a thing. But then there's our experience. And some things we may know or could be the goal, but we have to experience it. And Vikas talked about this with the self, and he was communicating about some other things earlier about the experience of a thing, right? And there is knowledge through experience, right? It's a different kind of knowledge than semantic knowledge. Like, is this premise true? Is this argument sound? But it is still kind of a knowing, right? It's just that it's not put into words in the same way. And that's where we could talk about the Tao, right? The Tao is that which is not spoken. There is no language to the Tao, So let's continue. So that's what I'm saying. We're going to read some of this, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit to kind of, that's the philosophizing, and that's where we can derive the merit of what is said. And it's the same thing with other books too. The difference between this is university classes, we can take as much time as we want. It's almost like a reading group, to some degree. All things are created twice. Did we do this one already? Yeah, okay, so I actually went on. So he talks about the mental creation first, then the physical manifestation. Example of constructing the home, measured twice, cut once. Example of the business, example of parenting, and a responsibility for the mental and physical creation. So being proactive, you're responsible for what you think and what you create in reality. And he wants to act in a way that enlarges our circle of influence, right? And we talked about that in the proactive chapter. There's the circle of concern, what I care about, and the circle of influence, what I have an effect on with my decisions, right? So design by default, next section. So we have not all mental creations are done consciously. Okay, good. That's we just talked about that, right? We can rescript our mental creations. So let's just see what he means by that. This is a very short slide here. So a principle that all things are created twice, not all first creations are by conscious design. In our personal lives, we do not develop our own self-awareness and do not become responsible for first creations. We empower other people and other senses outside of our circle of influence to shape much of our lives by default. We can be reactive and live the scripts handed to us by family, associates, or other people's agendas. The pressures of circumstance, scripts from our earlier years, our training and conditioning. Scripts come from people, not principles. They rise out of our deep vulnerabilities, our deep tendency on others, and our needs for acceptance and love, for belonging and a sense of importance and worth, for a feeling of what that we matter. We are aware of it, or whether we're aware of it or not, we are in control of it or not. There is a first creation to every part of our lives. And again, that's not necessarily true, right? Sometimes people can get in a state of flow and they're not thinking and they're doing art and they make a beautiful painting. So that's an easy falsification of what he's saying, right? But let's just go with what he's saying for now and see where he leads us. We are either the second creation of our own proactive design or the second creation of other people's agenda, circumstance, or habits. The unique capacities of self-awareness, imagination, and conscience enable us to examine first creations, what's in our mind, make it possible for us to take charge of our own first creation, write our own script. Habit 1 says you are the creator. Habit 2 says the first creation. So again, the reason this is valuable is he's trying to say And this is why critical thinking is important. To learn critical thinking is to say, have you chosen to believe in what you believe? If you didn't think about the things you believe, why do you believe it and how did it get there? To be a critical thinker is to evaluate your beliefs, whether it's God or it's the soul, homeopathy, Plato's Republic, whatever, and say, does this make sense? And evaluate it. Does it have fallacies? Is it logical? Right? And if it doesn't, then what do? How emotionally attached are you to the belief? And do you let it go? So if people say, this is the way that like men are supposed to behave, and this is the way women are supposed to behave, and then you act that way, that's a script in society. And it may be good or bad. We can talk about it.
Hey, Achilles,
Yeah.
could I just add in a quote that goes perfectly with this?
Sure.
It goes like this. I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
That's good. I like that. Do you know where that came from?
I watched the movie The Departed, Jack Nicholson.
Okay, that's cool. Sure. All right.
It
Very good.
says that in Atomic Habits as well. How it says, we are not victim to our environment. We are the architects of our environment.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, guys. Okay, next section. Leadership and management, the two creations. So this is slide 1 of like 3, I think. Oh, of 2. Leadership is not management. Leadership is a top-down approach, doing the correct things. A proactive, powerful leadership organizes resources in the right direction. Management is the second physical creation, bottom-up approach, doing things correctly. Management alone cannot prevent expertise from failing. And then he gives an example of dudes cutting through the jungle with machetes. The leader climbs the tallest tree to survey where they're going. And effectiveness is not the quality of effort, but where the effort is directed. So if they're trying to get to the river, or if they're going towards the mountain, it doesn't matter how well you use the machete. You're not going to get to where you need to be. Example 2, industry must monitor the environment of the customer buying habits and motives. Example 3, parenting trapped in management, control, efficiency, and rules instead of direction, purpose, and family feelings. So let's look at the book here. At the bottom there, habit 2 is based on principles of personal leadership. Leadership is the first creation. So this is a little coherent now. He's putting these two ideas together, right? I like that. That's good. Leadership is not management. Management is the second creation, which he'll discuss in the next habit 3. Leadership has to come first. Management is a bottom line focus. How can I best accomplish certain things? Leadership deals with the top line. What are the things I want to accomplish? Gives a quote by Peter Drucker and Warren Bennis. Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. Management is efficiency in climbing the ladder of success. Leadership determines whether the ladder is leaning against the right wall. So these are important things to talk about, right? I think this is good. And again, this is written for personal effectiveness and organizational effectiveness, right? He's a consultant. Grasp the important difference between the two if you envision a group of producers cutting their way through the jungle with machetes. They're the producers, the problem solvers, cutting through the undergrowth, clearing it out. Managers are behind them. They're sharpening the blades, writing policy, procedure manuals, holding muscle development programs, bringing improved technologies, setting up working schedules, compensation programs for machete wielders. The leader is the one that climbs the tallest tree, surveys the situation and says, oh, you're going in the wrong direction. But how do the busy, efficient producers, the managers, often respond? Shut up, we're making progress. As individuals, groups, and businesses, we're often so busy cutting through the undergrowth, we don't even realize we're in the wrong jungle. We're going in the wrong direction in the jungle. Rapidly changing environment in which we live makes effective leadership more critical than it's ever been in every aspect of independent and interdependent life. We are more in need of a vision or destination and a compass, a set of principles or directions, and less in need of a roadmap. We often don't know what the terrain ahead will be like or what we will need to get through it. Depend on our judgment at the time. And our compass will always give us direction. That's just the principles and values, and we can talk about what that means. And that's part of what I've been doing with the Philosophy Society recently in our discussions, right, over the last year, is discussing what is the philosophy really of well-being, and what does that mean? And we went through specific cases, and you can watch the videos to see what that is. Effectiveness, even survival, does not depend solely on how much effort we expend, on whether or not the effort we expend is in the right jungle. A metamorphosis is taking place in almost every industry and profession, demands leadership first and management second. So this is kind of where he gets this first and second creation thing. I think he derived it from this as well, right? He just uses this terminology of creation because he's a creationist. Business marketing is changing so rapidly that many producers and services, products and services that successfully met consumer tastes and needs, next page, a few years ago are obsolete today. Proactive, powerful leadership must constantly monitor the environment change, look at customer buying habits and motives, and provide the force necessary to organize resources in the right direction. So a deregulation of the airline industry, issues of healthcare, quality and quantity, imported cars. He's just talking about the market, business stuff. Creative leadership to keep headed in the right direction. No amount of management expertise can keep them from failing. You have to know what you're doing as a business, right? Efficient management without effective leadership, like straightening a deck of chairs in the Titanic. No management success can compensate for failure in leadership. Leadership is hard because we're often caught in a management paradigm. So he has this session with a year-long executive. He's a president of an oil company. And the president says to Stephen Covey, you point out the difference between leadership and management. I looked at my role as the president. I realized I've never been into leadership. I was always doing management. He was challenging the day-to-day stuff, the logistics, and he decided to withdraw from the management. He got other people to do it. He wanted to be a leader instead. He went through withdrawal pains because he stopped dealing with all the pressing, urgent matters that were right in front of him. They were giving him a sense of immediate accomplishment. He didn't receive much satisfaction when he was wrestling with direct issues, culture binding issues, deep analysis problems, seizing new opportunities. Others went through the withdrawal pains from their working style and comfort zones. He missed the easy accessibility. He still wanted them to be available. They wanted him to be available day to day and to solve their problems. But he persisted. He was convinced he needed to provide leadership and not management. Now his whole business is different. They have a different environment. They doubled their revenues and quadrupled their profits because of his leadership. Next page. People are convinced too often, or parents are convinced he's convinced that parents are trapped in the management paradigm, thinking about control, efficiency, and rules instead of direction and purpose. Leadership is even more lacking in their personal lives. Management without efficiency, setting and achieving goals before we have clarified our values. Okay, so this is the last section we're going to do for today with Stephen Covey. So rescripting, becoming your own first creator. Proactivity is based on the unique human endowment of self-awareness. Two additional unique human endowments. So those are like capacities of the mind, or I would talk about properties of the self. You can say the same thing. Enable us to expand our proactivity and to exercise personal leadership in our lives, or imagination and conscience. So self-awareness, imagination, and conscience. Through imagination, we can visualize uncreated worlds of potential that lie within us. Through conscience, we can come into contact with universal laws or principles with our own singular talents and avenues of contribution, personal guidance within which we can most effectively develop them. Combined with our self-awareness, these two endowments empower us to write our own script. So script is like patterns of behavior, right, within certain social context. We already lived with many scripts that have been handed to us through culture and socialization. Process of writing our own script is actually more of a process of rescripting or paradigm shifting, of changing some of the basic paradigms that we already have. As we recognize ineffective scripts, patterns of behavior or ways of being, incorrect or incomplete paradigms within us, we can use our proactivity to begin to rewrite those scripts. One of the most inspiring accounts of rescripting was the old president of Egypt, Sadat. So he had this hatred for Israel. That was his script. And on national television, he said, "I'll never shake the hand of an Israeli, never, never, never." Crowds all around Egypt would chant, "Never, never, never." He marshaled the energy and unified the will of the whole country into that script. The script is very independent and nationalistic, aroused deep emotions in the people, but it was also foolish. It would ignore the interdependent reality of the situation. Next page. He rescripted himself, the process he had learned when he was a young man, imprisoned in cell 54 in Cairo, the central prison. Result of his involvement in a conspiracy against King Farouk. He learned to withdraw from his own mind and look at it and see if the scripts were appropriate and wise. He learned how to vacate his own mind and through deep personal process of meditation to work on his own scriptures, his own form of prayer, and rescripted himself. He was almost loath to leave his prison cell because it was in there he realized his real success, that was a success within himself. Not having things, but having mastery, having victory over himself. So the private victory precedes public victory, a principle that Covey said before. For a time during Nasser's administrations, that was regulated to a prison position of relative insignificance. Everyone felt that his spirit was broken, but it wasn't. They were projecting their own motives onto him. They didn't understand him. He was biding his time. When it came time, he became president of Egypt, confronted his political realities, and rescripted himself towards Israel. He visited Jerusalem and opened up one of the most precedent-breaking peace movements in the history of the world, the Camp David Accord. He used his self-awareness, imagination, and conscience to exercise his personal leadership and change an essential paradigm. Changed the way he saw the situation. He worked at the center of a circle of influence. From that rescripting, he changed the paradigm, flowed changes of behavior and attitude, and affected millions of lives in the wider circle of concern. So even though this book was written in the 80s, I think 89, this still has relevance today, specifically this example, because of the Israel-Palestine conflict, right? Middle East in general, right? In developing our own self-awareness, many of us discover ineffective scripts, deeply embedded habits that are totally unworthy of us, totally incongruent with the things we actually value in life. Habit 2 says, we don't have to live with those scripts. We are responsible to use our imagination and creativity to write new ones that are more effective, more congruent, and more... Oh, wait, I didn't do this part. Okay, sorry. So first slide, productivity based on self-awareness. Writing scripts is a process of rescripting, paradigm shifting. So we have this example of Sadat, president of Egypt, rescripted himself while imprisoned, withdraw from the mind to see his own scripts. By developing our self-awareness, we discover ineffective scripts that are incongruent with our values. Responsible to write new, more effective, congruent scripts on the slides here, coherent with values, principles, and meaning. So the next example, I'm just going to go through these slides. Sorry, guys. Overreactive to children, focus on short-term behavior instead of long-term growth. You can shatter the relationship. We want our children to speak of teaching, training, and disciplining with love at a funeral. Identify with potential instead of limiting past, becoming a first creator. So creating in the mind first. Act with integrity and not reacting to emotion or circumstance. Okay, so that's it. Yeah, suppose, for example, he's highly overreactive to his children. Whenever they begin to do something that's inappropriate, he senses an immediate feeling or a tension in his stomach. He becomes defensive. He prepares for battle, and he's not focused on the long-term growth and understanding, but on short-term behavior. He wants to win the battle, not the war. Pulls out his ammunition, his superior size, his position of authority. He yells or intimidates, threatens, and punishes. Standing there victorious in the middle of the debris of a shattered relationship, while his children are outwardly submissive and inwardly rebellious, suppressing feelings that will come out later in uglier ways. If he were sitting at the funeral we visualized, one of his children was about to speak, he would want his kids to talk about how he had a victory of teaching, training, and disciplining with love over a period of years, that rather than a battle of scars and skirmishes. He would want his heart and mind to be filled with pleasant memories of deep, meaningful times together. Want his children to see him as a loving father who shared the fun and the pain of growing up. This is a little idealistic, but at the same time, it's a value that's not a bad thing to aim towards. Want to be listened and loved and helped. Yeah. So the reasons I would want those things deep down is he values his children. He loves them. He wants to help them. He values his role as their father. We don't always see those values. We get caught up in the day-to-day activities, the thick and thin of things. What are our values, what matters most, gets buried under the layers of our pressing problems, our immediate concerns, and our outward behaviors. We can become reactive, and the way we interact with our kids has little resemblance to the things we actually care about. Because we're self-aware and we have imagination and conscience, we can examine our deepest values. We can realize the script we're currently living may not be in harmony with those values, and that our life is not the product of our own proactive design, the result of a first creation that was from some other person or some circumstance. However, we can change. We can live out something we've imagined that is better than what we have, or something that's in our memory. We can tie ourselves to our limitless potential instead of our limiting past. We can become our own first creator. So we can make something in the mind that we can visualize that we want to do, right? Like having a successful business selling stuff from coconut plants. To begin with the end in mind means to approach my role as a parent, as well as other roles in my life, with my values and directions clear. I literally read this while I was singing today. I see it's underlined. That's what I was doing while you were drumming. It means to be responsible for our own first creation, to prescript myself so that my paradigms from which my behavior and attitude flow are congruent with my deepest values and harmony with correct principles. It also means to begin each day with those values firmly in mind. As the vicissitudes and the challenges come, I can make my decision based on those values. I can act proactively, right? And sometimes if you're stressed, it means taking space, or it means that I know I'll be overwhelmed in this situation, so I need to change the situation. Don't do that to yourself. And that's the problem that I get sometimes. I act with integrity. I don't have to react on emotion to the circumstance. I can be truly proactive, value-driven because my values are clear. That's pretty good for today, eh? I think so.
Yes.
Okay, we're back. And so next we'll start from, in this version, page 120, a personal mission statement. And then we'll see how far we get. If I have any more development in the self-talk I talked today, I'll do that at the beginning. And then I'll continue with Stephen Covey after that. Anybody in the room have any comments? Anything they want to say?
Yeah, I just gotta touch on something. Rewriting our scripts. Now, the book is good at telling what it is, but rewriting our scripts is actually deeply embedded within our belief patterns, our subconscious. You know, to wake up and be like, oh, I have this in mind will certainly help, right? But in terms of rewriting your script, it's I think you need to go more into it as to how to do that certain thing, because it's very, very deep within us. A lot of the times it's more about letting go than it is about adopting your values, believe it or not. But I
Sure,
just don't
yeah.
think the book does a good enough job of going into it, to be honest.
Well, let's get through the book first before we can
Sure,
say
sure.
that. You may be right. That might be the case. Part of what I was talking about with the self stuff earlier is a methodology to do that, to observe your current self-expression or past self-expressions, identify the properties, and then change them out, whether it's behavior, emotion, you know, like that what I'm telling myself, my narratives, my beliefs.
That's fair.
Um,
Yeah, exactly.
And then, like I said earlier, this is maybe you weren't here for this part, but this is like something we can start with and a launching pad to philosophize more about it. We're gonna get kicked out of the room shortly, so that's why I'm just speed talking at the moment.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, good. I think there was a really good chapter.
This is an example of rewriting yourself, right? The later in the book.
Okay, yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, he's kicking us out right now. Okay, thanks, buddy. All right, guys. So I'm gonna turn it off for now, and we'll see you guys next week.